start by just doing things yourself, create your process of elimination, figure out how things work, figure out how to troubleshoot them, because most of the time it's not broken. It's just you're broken. So we just need to fix ourselves.
When you use the term the rugged life, what do you mean by that?
Really, it is getting away from digital and going analog. And it doesn't have to be 100%, right? You can just dip your toe into the rugged life, or you can go ahead and just dive in head first. But ultimately, the point of the rugged life is that the more self-reliant you become, the less the crazy world out there can touch you, right? So going back in time and actually doing some things for yourself and not relying on technology or other people allows you to put your own air gap between you and that crazy world out there.
So given that definition, this is for everybody.
It's for everybody. I've been telling people that if you go back 200 years, every man, woman, and child in this country knew how to do just about everything because they were doing it to survive each day. But now you fast forward and we're relying on these to do everything for us, the cell phone and the apps and coffee and, fast food delivered to our front door. And I think the pandemic certainly has shined a light on a lack of capability that people have when it comes to just the basic stuff, right? We've become very reliant on technology and each other in order to get something done that we should certainly be able to do ourselves.
You used the word analog there, and you held up your cell phone showing your smartphone. So what I'm gathering from this is you're not somebody who's saying we need to abandon all the new technology. It's just taking pieces of that and then hitting the rewind button on different aspects of life and kind of piecing them together as a hybrid.
Exactly. The Rugged Life, in its book, you'll see the subtitle. It's the modern guide to self-reliance. So, be your own first responder, be your own protector, are two of the chapters in there. And the cell phone is still going to be a big piece because calling 911 is still the wisest thing to do when you find yourself in an emergency. Doing research on whether it's being your own hunter or be your own farmer is also going to require, the multiple encyclopedias you have in a phone, right? So yes, you should use your phone, but you should use it to support, making yourself a lot more self-reliant.
So for somebody who's tuning in and they say, okay, this sounds interesting, you have my ears right now or my eyes, where do I begin?
That's a good question. It all really, I've been telling folks that, hey, start with your interests, right? Let's say you live in downtown Manhattan in a 800 square foot apartment, right? There is something in this book, in the Rugged Life, for you. Let's say you live in a suburban environment, and you've got a small backyard. Then you definitely can start including the Rugged Life. It's a lifestyle change, but you get to pick and choose the things you want to change based on your interests. So, I would not suggest that you go out and buy 10 acres in a cabin, with a wood burning stove. That all sounds and looks very romantic, especially if you're, scrolling on Instagram. But I can tell you that would be a huge error if you haven't at least tried to grow herbs in your windowsill of your home, right? So I think a lot of folks would need to slowly transition to something like this and replace easy with something that's a little harder, and a little harder is going to have a whole lot more satisfaction, gratification than the easy button. But that's why you got to just pick the thing that you're interested in and then do a couple of home projects and see how you like it. But my guess is when people actually start doing this again, they're going to go, holy crap, like how cool it is to pick my own basil when I fix my, spaghetti dinner for my family. Something that simple could be the one thing that triggers you into increasing how rugged you want your life to be.
And you use that example of picking and are very basic, very simple.
Yeah.
What is it about doing these things with our hands, going back somewhat to an analog way of life, that is so satisfying?
I think, the big piece is once you realize that it's okay to be self-reliant, that you can actually pull it off. I think the big thing for me is, okay, I don't have to worry about whether they have, we're using basil, of course. I don't have to worry about whether they have basil at the grocery store or not. I don't have to worry about whether or not they have eggs. I don't have to worry about how the chickens were raised that give me the eggs that are from the grocery store. So it's a stair-step process of all of these realizations of control that you have. And with that control, to me, comes like ultimate freedom, right? I mean, like, imagine how independent and free you are when you're actually doing everything yourself. And like I said, it's not easy. The easy route is just continue what you're doing. But if you want to add some challenges to your life and get that satisfaction in getting that experience, then by all means, everyone should at least try it.
And when you talk about challenge, I can imagine the first couple of years delving into this would be the hardest because most people are going to have a job at that time, a full-time job, and then they're going to have to tiptoe into this in their free time. And in the beginning, there's going to be such a learning curve. Over time, you're going to pick up different skills and build that tool belt. But I can imagine it takes a lot in the beginning to get the momentum going.
Yeah, I would say if you're being your own expectation kind of management firm, like really take a moment and check your schedule, check your lifestyle. My guess is you will find the time. I think time is easy because if binging on Yellowstone or becoming Yellowstone is a choice, I would pick the second one, right? Why not implement certain aspects of Yellowstone into your life? I mean, what a great deal that is instead of binging on something. And so I think finding time is the easy part. I think the hard part is actually just breaking some of the bad habits and getting it going and picking that first little project and then diving in. And keep in mind, we've kind of gone and we've vectored down the path of gardening / farming, but every chapter in here is built towards a lifestyle in a whole lot of different ways. So be your own homemaker might actually be an easier one to start with, where you can take, coconut oil and, beeswax and make your own pomade, shampoo, and conditioner right there in your own kitchen, right? So this self-reliance thing too has become more and more popular as every day goes by. And we have the pandemic to thank for that. And then when you've got, obviously other global events going, it starts to make you think like, I'm not a prepper. I'm not like a fearmonger, but I do think for a second, like those red dawn moments, like what would I do if the skies filled up with red parachutes? We're watching it happen every day on the news, tanks rolling through cities. And, I don't think it's far-fetched to at least think that way here in our own little Western world protected by two oceans. I think those two oceans have become, very gray at this point. So anyway, going off tangent, but there you go.
No, that's great. And let's stick within the home piece then. We're going to try and delve into a lot of these different areas through our conversation. But you mentioned things like beeswax, coconut oil. What are some of the other things to get people started they can look at within the home to start to live more independently?
I think one of the most interesting things is water, right? Imagine, whether you live in a city or not, water supply can get shut off just like electricity or anything else. And I feel like water is pretty cool in the fact that there is so much of it for free. And it wasn't till I did a road trip and I went to homesteaders, okay? And the difference between a homesteader and a farmer grows things, whether it's, meat or, vegetables. And usually they do it to sell it. A homesteader basically creates their own farm, and everything they grow is for themselves, right? Now, if they have extra left over, then sure, they can sell it and bring in some income. So I went to homesteaders, I went to farms, I went to people on grid, and I went to people off grid. And a lot of times the term off gridder suggests okay, the crazy person who goes and isolates themselves out into the mountains and has nothing to do with society. And that could be furthest from the truth. An off gridder just means you're not relying on the power grid for the most part. And it also includes water and other things, but power is kind of the big one. And so traveling around and getting like a full dose of each of those kinds of families and how they get by each day just fine was part of the research. And then you start looking at the common denominators. And that water piece, I had really never thought about it, to be honest with you. But if you have, let's say, a little shed out back, let's say your own home, okay, your own home right now, and you'll say you're in a single family home and it has at least 1,000 square foot roof on it, okay, you probably already have gutters, okay, that collect the water. The water then goes down to a down pipe, and then it just goes either into a French drain because you don't like having, mud in your front yard, or it goes straight out into your yard or down onto a little concrete slab you can buy at Home Depot, and it just disperses into your lawn or whatever. Now, imagine if you were collecting that. So one of the things I did is I put a simple math equation in there. And to keep math simple, if you take the square footage of your roof times the multiplier, it will give you how many gallons of water that you could collect with a 1-inch rain. And now 1 inch of rain with 1,000 square foot roof will give you over 600 gallons of free water, right? And the average person is supposed to be drinking a gallon a day. They don't. All right. They drink coffee, and then they may put some water into their diet. But for the majority of Americans, they're not meeting that requirement, even though they should. So you can, right from there, knowing how many days we have in a year, you can do the easy math and figure out that, you probably get away enough water, store enough water in one rain that's 1 inch for 2 people for a year, right? It's just a matter of, okay, now how do I collect this stuff? But the beauty of it is self-reliance, as popular as it's becoming, you can now collect water in all kinds of different food-ready, food-safe containers that you can buy just about anywhere now, especially off Amazon or wherever you like to do your online shopping. Once again, that's combining that modern piece into being more self-reliant. I'm not saying go out and build yourself a barrel out of wood. In the wood you cut down from the tree in your backyard. I mean, that would probably take a lot longer than you think, and frankly, you'd be more frustrated, and you'd probably dehydrate before you had a chance to build a barrel. So, it's probably good just to combine the modern capabilities that are out there to enhance your self-reliant capability. But imagine that, now if you took the gutter system and if you put pantyhose over the gutters now you're keeping out leaves, bird poop, right? You're keeping everything out. And then now you're funneling it down into, whether it's a 55-gallon barrel system that you can hook up one and buy the barrels that actually have PVC connections. And so you can go from barrel to barrel to barrel to barrel, all lining up down the side of your house, and literally collect free water forever. And to put it in perspective, a lot of people will throw the BS flag at some of it because they're like, well, I live in Arizona. I live in New Mexico. I live in a desert. But even a desert, if you look at the rain records over the past 100 years, even those most dry, arid climates usually get at least 12 inches of rain, right? 12 inches now collected. You've got a lot of water. That's enough for you, your family, the gardens, your animals, because you have to keep in mind, if you really dive into this, your water source isn't just for you anymore. It's for everything that you have going or that you're trying to grow in some form or fashion, or just to keep clean, So it's a rabbit hole without a doubt. Each chapter is a rabbit hole. But what I did is I took all those rabbit holes and gave you the broad spectrum dose of, okay, be your own farmer, be your own hunter, be your own butcher. Each chapter is be your own fill in the blank into what I think is a well-rounded, rugged lifestyle that you can apply no matter where you live right now.
Taking that water piece a little bit further, you mentioned the pantyhose and filtering out some of the gross,
Yeah.
like the bird poop and leaves and stuff. What would you have to do to that water to make it safe for human consumption or for the animals that you're raising?
Rainwater, for the most part, for your animals can be okay. It's going to be okay for your garden. You just really got to inspect the path in which that water is collected and ensure that is, sanitized the best you can. But the beauty of the collection piece, the hard part is over. Filtration is actually easy. There are so many different ways and pieces of technology that you can actually hook up to that barrel. Imagine you can hook up a faucet. It's all you're just leveraging gravity to run water through a filter, and then now you can, put it into whatever containers, smaller containers that you're going to use to store. And all of this stuff, once again, is readily available, and it's not priced. This is stuff that's been around for a long time. Probably one of the coolest shortcuts that I didn't think about until I went out to the Trayers. Okay, the Trayer family lives in northern Idaho, literally in the middle of nowhere with zero cell phone reception. Okay, and I show up to their place, and initially they had built an 1,100 square foot cabin. It was awesome, right? It's small. It had exactly what they needed and nothing else. And it was run completely off solar. And then they had raised, a special needs son, for what was it, the first 11 or 12 years out there, right? Completely self-reliant. And he built that cabin with the trees in the area. They literally lived in a tent for a year before the cabin was done. Okay, so they went all in, and then they decided, you know what, this is too much space. 1,100 square feet. This is way too much. We actually don't need that much space. So they went up the mountain a little ways, and they built a 300 square foot tiny home, right? And then they just used and leveraged that space the best they could. And the reason, getting back to my point, one of the coolest little discoveries that you can all implement right now are all the technology that is put into RVs these days, right? These itty bitty little water heaters, right? We're talking the size of this book, right? Is a water heater, and it's a tankless water heater, and you can install that. And then all of your lighting systems, it's LED, and it's purposely, everything built for the RV industry is purposely made to be low energy, but high output, or the highest possible, right? So that you still have like this kind of glam camping lifestyle, if that's what you're looking for. But if you take all those features and actually implement them into your home, it's amazing. Because it's, wow, I don't actually need, the 100-gallon water heater. You can buy a tankless, RV water heater, and it do just fine for the shower that you have. So it's, and I talk about some of that stuff in there. But once again, implementing everything from your water filtrations to water heating and all of those little luxuries that we take for granted, you can still do even with a more rugged lifestyle.
You talked about doing research for the book and visiting these different families, and you just gave an example there of that family that downsized their home over time.
Yeah.
Talk about what a typical day in the life would look like for, one of these families that's taken it pretty far down the continuum and say they're off the grid. What would a day look like?
That's a good question. And I asked all of them the same. So because I went to different ones, some still had the husband worked full time, and the wife stayed home and ran the homestead. Another, they both are off grid and both running the homestead. Every single one of them will still tell you got to have money. There is no such thing as just going off grid and being able to pull it off. You still got to get parts and pieces to fix, your chainsaw. You still have to be able to have some form of income to pay for the things that sustain the lifestyle that you're living. And their daily schedule revolves around, basically staying warm, staying hydrated, and feeding themselves, right? And each of those items does take substantial amount of work, right? You're thinking each day is, okay, how do we prepare for the next season, right? And as long as you're always preparing for the next season, then your day is somewhat dictated. Now, if you're preparing for tomorrow, well, then you are like way behind, and you're going to have a horrible experience, and you're probably going to go, screw it, sell the land, we're moving back to the city, and so the daily schedule, broadly is you're up in the morning early, right? And the work begins, right? Whether that be getting the fire started because it's a cold morning, getting a wood burning stove going just to get coffee. But that's not to say that you can't be on grid in the middle of nowhere and just have, a coffee maker, right? You can still do that. Once again, you have to decide what the luxuries are that you want and the ones that you're willing to just work harder for. They get their breakfast going. Once again, they have gone out, and a couple of families have chickens. And so, how many ever chickens you have is probably the number of eggs you're going to have each day. You got a dozen chickens, you're going to have a dozen eggs every day, right? So you might not want a dozen chickens. So they grab their eggs, come back inside. They probably have sausage, maybe a bacon from a hog they butchered, months ago, and they stuck in their deep freezer. Once again, deep freezer, modern thing, but something that you have to have out there. Unless, of course, after you butcher, you go straight to smoking it. Now you can smoke it all, and then now you can preserve it, store it, put it away, right? So then they fix breakfast, and then immediately getting to that day's tasks, which once again is preparing for the next season. So let's take, firewood, for example. You have to season firewood. You can't go outside, chop down a tree, and then expect to use that very same tree to then throw in your fireplace to keep you warm, right? So you're chopping that down for the next winter, right? You're not chopping it down for this winter, or else, once again, you're behind the power curve. And then, a lot of the work they do is, hey, what can I get while the sun is on my side? And they get as much work as they can while they have daylight on their side. And then their evenings usually consist of anything indoors that's more on the homemaking side. They could be canning, or jarring vegetables, because let's face it, if you've ever grown a tomato, you end up with hundreds of tomatoes, and you're not going to eat them all. So you might as well have a jarring canning plan in place. They could be, patching up jeans, right? You got to know. I don't think there's a kid right now today that knows how to sew a patch of denim onto their jeans and it actually stay there, So I even went back and put even those simple skills into the homemaking side chapter, or, hey, you got to cut your own hair, right? For us guys, that's easy. Now a woman, she's going to probably be a little more picky on how her hair is cut. But I even put in there how to cut, all the family members' hair. And I even got a little crazy with, the techniques that you can use for a woman so that it's still stylish, even in the middle of nowhere with limited resources, right? So you can see the day stuff is usually outdoors and getting it done, and save all the indoors for at night when you're actually forced to be inside.
Well, one thing that's really interesting as you share this is that these people are so connected to the seasons, to the elements, on a yearly basis and then again on a daily basis, trying to work within that daylight versus somebody, in the 21st century living a more typical lifestyle. Every day is kind of the same. I
Yeah.
mean, you might need to put on a winter coat in the winter and put on shorts and sandals in the summer, but temperature's pretty regulated inside buildings. Water's always there. Go to the grocery store. We have all the imported food from all over the world. We can pretty much get the same thing all year long. So it's just so much more in tune with nature. And that's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You nailed it. I mean, running with the cycle of the sun and keeping the household going, definitely was a little bit eye-opening. You think about it, it kind of makes sense. And you're like, well, that's kind of common sense oriented. But, like we joke about all the time, common sense isn't necessarily that common, right? And the other thing, the other reason they're running this is when I talk about it in the chapter, Be Your Own Power Grid, right? So for those that are running on solar, the sunny day is what dictates also what they're going to run. Let's say they do have a washer. Most of them don't have dryers, but they'll go ahead and say, yeah, I'll take the washer. So the sun is going, my batteries are charging, and I've got full power inside my little tiny cabin. I'm going to do the wash during daylight, right? Get it done. Once again, what can I take advantage of the sunlight for? Certainly applies to your power grid, because tomorrow could be a cloudy day and you don't want a hamper full of clothes and nothing to wear on a cloudy day, right? Especially on your homestead and you're living in tight quarters with one another. In that same set of solar panels that are charging those batteries and also providing power to your home is all about the warm or hot water too, to a certain degree. So conservation for those that want to live a greener lifestyle, going solar and actually planning your day based on sunlight, all of a sudden you find yourself being more efficient, more effective, and also at the same time conserving and doing your part to create a more green world.
When you went and visited these people, talk about their mental health. This is a totally different lifestyle. And, it's so much more simple. There's going to be stresses. There are going to be different stresses. But did you find that these people were generally happy?
Yeah. I mean, you can tell. The one thing you noted with all of them is their excitement about what they're doing and how excited they were to share their lifestyle with me, and they're all in and talking way above anything that I know, right? I am still a beginner, and they will never tell you that they're experts either, because they're failing every day. They're failing in order to learn, and when they learn, now they are moving forward, right? And but to anchor back to mental health, I actually cover that at the beginning and at the end of the book, because there's 10 questions I put up front. And one of them is, do you like who you're living with, right? Because you might love them, but do you like them? And there's a difference. And you have to make sure that you've got that piece understood and squared away from the beginning. Because when you talk about living in tighter quarters and all of a sudden you're working together in a very different way in order to then survive each day, that's totally different than two people that spend 8 hours a day away from one another, coming home at night, maybe sharing the kitchen, sharing a meal, and then watching TV in silence together, and then going to bed. That's different than, okay, we're getting up together, we're getting the chickens squared away, we're going to feed the animals, you're going to go out and grab whatever water we need for the day, and we're going to get things going, right? That's totally different. So mental health is really important. On top of that, whether you like each other or not, is also when you are out in the middle of nowhere, no matter how close nowhere is to civilization, you're still isolated to a certain degree. And so it's important that yeah, you work all day and you're doing a lot of hard work together, but you certainly have to make time, mental health time, whether it's just time apart or reconnecting in a different way other than just work, right? So whether that's board games or some form of entertainment together that's not just all work. You got to throw some play in there as well, because it's really easy. And I noticed this with some of these families is that it's they're putting in 16-hour days when you could probably back off a little bit, save something for the next day. It's not going anywhere. It's gonna that chicken's still gonna be there tomorrow. you know.
And tying to the piece about having to like your partner because you are in such close proximity and working together throughout the day, you also have to be on the same page with how far you want to take this. I can
Yeah,
imagine there's a lot of people that, listening to us or reading your book might, get a little bit of a taste and like the idea of this, but maybe their partner isn't on board. So it's not really going to fly. They're going to have to compromise and meet somewhere in the middle.
yeah. There's definitely compromise all the way through from beginning to end, and that's why anchoring back to the first part of our discussion, try a couple of these projects that are in the book at home, and see if you kind of dig it. I think where failure has happened more times than not is those that go head first. They buy the cabin, they buy land, and they move out there, and then they go, wait a minute, this wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. First is the hard work, but the other piece that we haven't talked about is money. It's not, don't think for a second that somehow living this lifestyle, especially at the beginning, is somehow cheaper, because that is the furthest from the truth I realize with these folks. You're still going to need an income to get up and running, and get to the point where you're self-sufficient. These animals need to be fed if you're going to go down the animal route. And another piece, your lifestyle, right? As soon as you take on animals, it's like taking on toddlers. You're not going on vacation anytime soon unless you've got some neighbors that really like you and going to take care of your sheep or your goats or your cow. Whatever route you go to get protein, well, it needs to be nurtured every day. You've got to feed it. You got to water it. You got to check it and make sure it's not getting sick. I mean, there's a lot of different angles to this that suddenly I think, people just don't think about, and then they get overwhelmed. And then they're like, holy crap. So this book sheds truth on that. I even put in at the back a sample budget, just so like, hey, you're going to need the X amount of dollars in order to get started. And once again, you don't have to go all out. You just add a little here, add a little there. You can take a corner of your apartment in Manhattan and do a vertical garden. You can take, if you're living in a suburban area, you can take 6 spare tires that your local discount tire company is going to throw away. Go buy and grab them, right? Throw your first tire down on the ground, fill it with soil. Take that potato in the fridge that you haven't eaten yet, cut it up into 6 pieces and throw it in the soil. Once you see green break through that first layer, take your second tire, put it on top, dump some soil in, right? Once you see green again, dump your soil, or next tire, dump your soil, right? You're building this spare tire vertical garden. And within several months, you will have hundreds of potatoes inside that little tire garden you just built. And it only took up the square footage of the circumference of that tire and then the wall space of wherever you decide to stack them, right? So there's a lot of other routes you can go, and that's the purpose of the book. But once again, it's just, hey, let's get the complacency and laziness, let's throw that aside, at least with certain things in your life, and get some fulfillment, some gratification out of those parts that you replace. And I guarantee you, people will be like, holy crap, this is actually kind of cool, right? We've forgotten how to do it. And I feel like my job after the pandemic is like, let's bring it back.
Let's come back to the money piece and talk about people that have been doing this for a long time. And
Yeah.
this is a lifestyle that they've figured out over a number of years, and they know that they're in it for the long haul. What kind of work will people do to sustain that piece of the puzzle?
It's a variety. As mentioned, if you take your homestead and let's say you got a couple of acres, um, there's money making potential with a couple of acres. You know, that's plenty of space for a whole herd of chickens, right? And all the eggs. Trust me, people will buy them. Okay, so you can create cash flow with your land. You've got to think about it. You know, you got to figure out how am I going to monetize what I'm doing, and also it support me in what I'm doing to be self-reliant. Um, you know, berries, like a lot of your berries will grow in one season. So you can produce berries and then actually make money in the first season that those things are planted. Now, that's not the same for a lot of the other things you think you're going to sell. A lot of your fruit trees, you're not going to make any money off those for a couple of years. Here in Texas, Texas pecans or pecans are a big deal. But for a tree to mature enough to actually produce pecans is 10 years, right? But once you have one tree or a whole orchard, let's say you got 5 acres, you could easily put 100, maybe 150 pecan trees on, let's say 5 acres, and each tree will produce you about $1,000 a year. So you do the math. I mean, it can turn into some really good money, but it takes time and money to get to that point with a lot of these things. A cow's pretty easy. You can go buy a smaller cow, let's say 300 pounder, right? You go buy it 300 pounder for maybe $700, and then you let it graze on an acre or two, and you water it each day. Once it gets to 1,000 pounds, you can butcher it. You got enough meat to last you and your family, quite some time. You'll have to have multiple deep freezers, but that's an example of like money saved, right? It takes time. But the one thing for sure out of this whole thing people have to keep in mind is that convenience, right? That's on one side of the spectrum, and then that ruggedness on the other, right? So whatever is convenient probably isn't rugged. Whatever is rugged probably isn't convenient. And, once again, the goal of the book is kind of like find some middle ground that people can test and try and see what works. But like right now, I have a 6-acre pasture that I've been going, how can you monetize this? Like what's the easiest, fastest way? One, there is no easy, but there are faster ways. And so what I've realized is, flower gardens. You can actually have a flower farm, and each acre make you about 25 to 30,000 a year, providing flowers to distributors that then go put them in your grocery stores that people go and buy for Valentine's and Mother's Day and Easter and all those holidays. The flowers have to come from somewhere. So, 1 acre, 25 to 30 grand a year for flowers, it's not bad. You just got to figure out how to keep the rabbits and the deer from eating all those things, So, where you go and where there's the monetization, there's always all these other risks that come in that you got to figure out as well. The pests. So once again, it doesn't come easy, but man, the gratification, satisfaction that come with it is huge. And I think that's the payoff to all of it.
You came at that answer from a totally different angle than I assumed. You were talking from a homesteader kind of hybridizing into a farmer and starting to, sell things that they're making or growing.
Yeah.
I guess I was picturing somebody having a part-time job that they go to during the day and then come back and do this work in the off hours. Did you see any of that?
Oh, yes, certainly. It's usually, if it's a couple or a family, dad or the husband has still got a job of some sort. But if you have a trade or a skill, I saw one family where he's like a handyman to all the neighboring homesteads, right? He's so well-rounded. He had so much knowledge that it was easy for him to go and help others, and just he collected an hourly rate. So if you've got some kind of resident skill or trade, then it's going to be easier for you to work your own hours, work your own schedule, and still make money and still be present to do what you need on the homestead. And once again, when we talk about all that, that's, for in some people's eyes, that's the best case scenario. But those of you living already suburban lifestyle and the conveniences of technology and this and that, then that's considered the worst case scenario, like living on your own in the middle of nowhere, but it is what you make it. And once again, the level of independence you want to create is your own decision. But there is a certain mentality you have to have with this, and that is the willingness to fail, the willingness for that plant to die because you suck, and going, okay, I suck. I need to get educated and do a better job next time. And so you have to be willing to fail over and over and over again and not get frustrated with it. Just look at it as a moment to learn, take your lessons learned, apply it to the next time, because that is definitely what's going to happen time and time and time again. Or you grow the perfect whatever it is. You grow the perfect rabbits, and those rabbits are going to provide you meat. But that coyote comes along and destroys it all in one night, right? That's a failure. Yeah, and it's easy to pack up your stuff and say, forget it, I'm just going to go back home and I'm going to start eating chicken breasts from the grocery store instead of these rabbits. Or you just knock the dust off and keep on moving forward.
That handyman example brought up a couple things for me. One being community. You can either do this, isolating yourself and going to an area that is very remote, or there's the possibility of connecting with other like-minded people and having them within proximity. And like the handyman, again, coming back to that, having different skills that you can share with one another and maybe even barter with one another. Maybe you're somebody that likes to raise, cows and chickens and produce meat and eggs from that. And then somebody else is a handyman and can fix different things that are broken. And I just see different opportunities depending on how people want to do this.
No, that's a great point. One of the families, they lived on roughly, maybe it was 10 acres or so. And then their neighbors, with their acreages, and they did exactly what you're talking about. They turned it into a community effort where the family I interviewed, they had a little bit of everything, to be honest with you, but they didn't have the farming, gardening side down, but they had the meat and egg side squared away. And so that's where they had an advantage, and that's where they were able to barter and do some trading and even some selling to the local grocery store. So, I think it's interesting in the fact that, one, it takes money, and there's a lot of effort you're going to have to put in a lot of different ways. But there's a lot of other for each thing you do or each thing you invest in, there's actually a way to make it all back in some form or fashion, and I think that's probably a pretty cool piece of this whole thing.
You talk about in the book, if somebody's getting into the animal piece and they want to either raise animals for food, or in this case, eggs, chickens is the place to go. So talk about how somebody who this is brand new, but they're like, okay, I want to start to go down that continuum and start to produce some of my own food other than gardening. Talk about chickens.
Chickens are very popular because they can do one of two things. They can provide meat or they can provide eggs. What most people don't know is you're not going to get meat and eggs out of one chicken, right? So there are meat chickens and there are egg chickens. There are some meat chickens that over evolution, you have to butcher them at about whatever it is, 8 to 12 weeks or whatever, because they literally genetically will put on so much weight that their own little legs will break if you don't butcher them, right? And then, of course, on the other side, you have your egg chickens. Now, if you tried to eat an egg chicken, it's going to be stringy meat. There's not going to be very much meat on those chickens because they put all their energy into making eggs. So that's one decision point, right? The other one of your listeners is probably saying, well, I live in an HOA and they're never going to let me have chickens. Well, guess what? I gave you the cure to that problem in there because you can list your chickens as service animals. That's right. You can go say that your chickens are service animals and are helping to reduce stress and anxiety in your life. And all you got to do is go list them as service animals and then send it to your HOA, and your HOA can say absolutely nothing about you having chickens in your little suburban backyard. Okay. But once you decide, and my guess is most people go, it'd be kind of cool to walk outside, or my kids be able to go outside and grab eggs each morning for breakfast. And that's certainly cool. And that's where I would start. The other piece you have to think about, and the other advantage of having chickens in your lawn, is chicken poop is probably the best fertilizer in the world. And so in the book, I talk about building a hoop coop. Okay. And a hoop coop basically is imagine a door frame. You lay it down on the ground, and then you take PVC pipe and you bend it from one side of the door frame to the other, and you're going to do this probably a dozen times, and then you're going to put chicken wire over it. And now you've got a hoop coop. And if you put wheels down at one end, it makes it easy to move this chicken coop around. And so that way your chickens are still free range, but they're not just roaming all over your backyard. Because let's face it, the cats and other animals from the neighborhood are going to very quickly realize there's free meals over there. So you got to still protect them and protect your investment. But you let those chickens eat all the bugs and dirt and everything that they're supposed to be eating in the area that they're confined to in that little hoop coop. Because remember, they're still on the earth. They're still living and breathing on the soil, which is the best way to raise chickens and get the healthiest eggs you'll ever eat in your life. The kind with the bright orange yolk, not the yellow yolk that you're used to from the grocery store. And then you move that hoop coop, right? You move it every 2 weeks or so, and you will have the best lawn you've ever had in your life. I mean, it will start growing out of control, right? And once again, you're getting one thing that good self-reliant people do. And once you start doing this, is you start figuring out all the different ways to leverage and use that one thing, right? You don't let anything go to waste. You start quickly realizing, yes, I got the chickens. The chickens are making me eggs, but they're also fertilizing the yard. And by keeping that yard fertile is keeping the chickens alive, because you're going to rotate them back to that fertile area eventually, right? And it's going to be full of new bugs and worms and stuff that they get to eat. And it's just this cycle of life that you're getting to see real time. That's pretty cool. And you're leveraging every aspect of that little piece of land that you have. And that's where that feeling of independence and freedom starts to kick in.
You talked about cycle of life there, and one undeniable truth about living this self-sufficient lifestyle, unless you're going to be a vegetarian or vegan, is that you're going to be involved in taking of another animal's life, whether that be, you mentioned the chickens there that live 8 to 12 weeks or whatever, the meat chickens, I believe they were, and you're going to have to get comfortable, and you're going to have death in your face more than you're used to, as somebody who's just going to the grocery store and, picking up chicken breasts and everything's already been cleaned up and taken care of, which I think is a natural and good thing for people, at least potentially, but it isn't something most people are going to be used to.
You're right. And I hit on that too. You have to have a little bit of the stomach for it, or the designated butcher in the family. But there is a lifeline for folks that don't want to do that. There are plenty of people that will come do it for you, right? If you're when you get into the butchering thing, it's actually ideal to be part of the butchering process with someone who's already done it multiple times, right? And a good butcher, they're not going to waste anything. If you were to do it yourself, you're probably going to waste 50% of that animal just trying to figure it out. 50% of the meat is going to go to waste. So I highly recommend that, number one, if it's not something you think you're up to, then have somebody else do it and slowly integrate yourself into the process. Once you're in the process, take that opportunity to learn and figure out all the different ways that animal can be used to then, um, be leveraged for your life and for your family. And then eventually one day you might get to the point where you stop looking at these animals as these cute, cuddly little things, and you actually start viewing them as, no, that's my life. That's life right there. That's what I'm going to eat, and it's a form of fuel, right? It's a form of it's power to get you through the next day and the next day and the next day, right? So, and it'll take everybody some time to maybe get there, especially the kids, and especially if you're, raising rabbits to eat, which are probably faster, easier than chickens. And they don't make a lot of noise for those that live in suburban or urban environments. You can still do that, but those are very difficult for some folks to butcher. So it's a good point you bring up, and it's definitely something you have to think about ahead of time.
From my own life experience, I grew up fishing and cleaning the fish and taking their lives and not really thinking much about it because that's the world I grew up in. And then later on in life, moved, away from that, became a vegetarian vegan at one point and couldn't see myself doing that at that point. And now I'm somewhere in between. I'm not somebody that is involved in fishing or hunting or, raising animals for meat or any animals other than my pet dog. But what I'm getting at with all this is I think it is something very natural and something that human beings can get really used to in a healthy way over time.
Yeah, you're right. And imagine starving. There's a point when you, depending on how hungry you let yourself get, you will have these, what I call these natural mammalian reflexes kick in. Okay. No matter how civilized you are, if you're starving enough, you're going to kill it and you're going to eat it. And if you want to live, and my guess is once those mammalian reflexes kick in, you're going to do so, and you're not even going to think for a second that cute little rabbit, all of a sudden go, oh, poor thing. It's just not going to matter to you if you're hungry enough, But yeah, that's definitely a great point and an aspect that, I think a lot of folks will not think about before they dive into it. And that's why I brought it up. But I'm curious, you did the vegan vegetarian thing. Were you happy during that phase, or are you still doing that, or what were your thoughts on it?
No, that was a while back. That was part of my health journey. Just yeah, that to me through YouTube actually, I found that world of, this alternative health and wellness space, and that in the beginning was what to me seemed like the right choice for health and wellness.
Yeah.
So that was part of my journey for a couple of years, and now I've evolved to a omnivore diet, and I feel more content and more healthy eating this way.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was getting to. Is most people I talk to that kind of tried vegan vegetarian, they just didn't feel as good or as energetic or as motivated as they did when they start putting animal proteins back in their diet.
And sticking on the cycle of life thing here, let's get a bit philosophical. I would argue that if somebody is, say, fishing and taking the life of that animal and using that to fuel their body, that is going to get them thinking about their own life and making them more present and making the most of the moments.
Yes, I think so. I think, one, being involved in the process is spiritual and will eventually make you reflect on, okay, I'm going to die someday. And I think the best group of people who've ever done this is, Native or American Indians. They really connect with their kills, right? And they use every aspect of it. And it is a spiritual moment for them. That us living a more civilized, modern lifestyle, we never were exposed to that. And it makes death for us like almost like this overwhelming thought for some, and others, they don't even think about it at all. But I do agree with you. If you're part of that process, like the Native Americans are, and you're seeing it and living it and breathing it day in and day out, then I think it will put you spiritually in a place where you're going to start valuing nature again, being outside, doing things with your hands, and really exemplifying what the rugged life is all about.
So we've got into a lot of the different areas now. We've talked about hunting or gardening or raising animals for meat or eggs. We've talked about, using solar for power. We've talked about making different things to use in the home. We've gotten into a lot. What are some of the other things that people need to consider if they're going to live this lifestyle?
Oh boy, there's still a lot to go here. I think number one, you've got to ask yourself the 10 questions, and with that comes location, right? Where? That's a big thing, because where determines the climate zone you live in. Climate zone then determines what you can grow, what you can't grow, what you can do, what you can't do. There are areas where growing something will be plentiful, but you're also probably going to have weather that you may not like, right? So there is give and take. And then it's, how does that weather affect your mood, your mental health, your body, right? Some people in dry climates, their skin is just, it's like one big scab. They just don't deal with that well. And there's others that if they go to really humid environments, they have the opposite effect. Their skin just doesn't do that well. And then there's, of course, just being outside and out in nature when it comes to emergencies. 911, how close is it? Well, you got to take a look at that, and you have to have a plan for it. Communication. How do I communicate with my family back in the city? We really take for granted, 5 bars or 5G, LET, or whatever, is at the top of your phone. But what most people don't realize is, wait, there are other ways to communicate other than that cell phone. When your cell phone may not work, there are some incredible UHF, VHF handheld radios that have, come light years along with cell phone technology. But we just default to cell phone because it doesn't rely on line of sight. It relies on towers. But there are great HF, UHF, VHF radios that I talk about in there that will get you some pretty decent mileage as long as it's line of sight. Those medical emergencies, and 911 isn't going to be there immediately. Well, okay, that means I got to be the stopgap. I have to do this stuff, which means you got to get educated on it. Being your own protector, okay, there's predators, and I'm not talking humans, but those are out there. There's crazy people out in the middle of nowhere, so, that doesn't go away no matter where you live. You're just going to add the other predators, the big furry ones, right? And you got to have a plan for those. So, every aspect of life, and even then some, I would say, I'd say there's even more life to live the further you kind of go out away from the city and from the suburban areas. But there's certainly a lot to check off in your decision making to determine if it's good for you, if you're a right fit, because frankly, this is not for everyone. It is for people who really want to challenge themselves to the point where they're willing to fail and then be okay with failing and then do it again. And then eventually know that, wow, I know that I am going to be satisfied in a whole other way, that living in the city and having things easy is just not going to satisfy me. Or As I mentioned in the beginning, this is the greatest way. If you don't want a pandemic to affect you, then be as self-reliant as possible. If you don't want, cyber attacks to affect you, then be self-reliant. If you don't want supply chain issues to affect you, then be self-reliant. So back to the beginning, the more self-reliant you are, the less that world can affect you.
Clint, as a retired Navy SEAL, I can imagine before doing the research, writing this book, you were pretty self-reliant. But talk about where you were at that point and then some of the things you've adopted along the way.
Oh, wow. I'm still adopting a lot. I started with the 100 Deadly Skill book series, right? And that's all about surviving seconds, minutes, hours, days. Those books give you, surviving natural disasters, surviving against bad guys, skills that I thought every person should focus on and should know just in case a good day goes bad. And then I realized, wait a minute. The odds of some of that stuff happening to you, yeah, it's there. But you see what happened with the pandemic and on the back end here with supply chain and going to grocery stores and aisles are empty and some of the meats you like aren't there. And wait a minute, I got to start doing this. This is the one thing that I should be focusing on. Yeah, I can go out and hit my heavy bag for, 30 minutes every morning and work out and do these things that keep me physically fit, which you shouldn't stop. But those are all, sometimes we're focused around a threat that could walk around a corner. But no, the real threat is what if I don't have food, water, or some of those basic things that I'm so used to? And so for me, it's been, okay, what are the handyman things first? Like, I feel like I used to be my dad's gopher. My dad was one of these guys that could pull an engine apart and put it back together and not once look at any of the manuals that were collecting dust out there in the garage, So he had an engineering mindset, super smart dude. And I kind of thought back, like, I need to get like that. Because once you can take things apart and put them back together confidently, then all of a sudden, whether it's farming, hunting, growing something, you name it, all of a sudden those things now become easy because you have the confidence to fix it if you break it. And so I've started going, all right, I'm doing this myself, or I'm going to do that myself, and I'm going to stop relying so much on these outside. It's easy to hire someone to come fix it. But if I need to troubleshoot a water heater or troubleshoot, a power panel, these panels you have or a plumbing issue, I feel like that's a great place to start for those of you that live in a home. It's like become your own handyman. And once again, I've got a whole chapter on it, but get back to those basics. And then all of a sudden, doing some of these bigger projects, bigger tasks become a lot easier. So that's where the transition happened for me. Driving across country instead of flying gave me a whole appreciation again for this beautiful place we live. Get outside, drive through some mountains, go check out some oceans because we've got it all. We just got to go do it. And I think, that reconnection with nature and the beauty that you got out there also will want to make you want to go do things outside that actually benefit you. Running outside benefits you, but growing something outside also benefits you, whether that's chickens, eggs, or, the next tomato you slice.
One of the cool things about learning these skills, say it is gardening or plumbing or whatever handyman project you take on, is that you learn and then you have that skill for the rest of your life. I mean, you might need to go back and refresh or, pick up on a little tidbit or two.
Yeah.
But these are life skills that are, and again, kind of pigging off what you said before, a lot of these will translate into different aspects of living more self-sufficiently as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the one piece too that's important to note here is eye, hand, foot coordination, right? We think of that when it comes to boxing or some of those other, at least for me, that's what I think about. But all of a sudden it becomes applicable when you're working outside all day, which those cognitive skills are awesome for brain health, right? Keeping your mind active. Critical thinking. I don't have hot water. Okay, shit. Well, what do I do? Well, let's work backwards. First thing I'm doing, is going to my panel. Where's my panel? Well, some people don't even know where the panel is in their house, right? So, okay, that's the panel. You open it up and it's got all these little black switches, those fuses, Okay, I got to check all those. You might have thrown one. Okay, all of them are good. All right, well, maybe there's one of those circuits with the reset button. We have these outlets on our walls and you got this little reset button. It's GFI, right? Oh, okay, go check that. So before you know it, you're developing a process of elimination, or a process that you're putting in order to troubleshoot. We have forgotten even that most basic thing. How do you troubleshoot something, right? Even with technology, people will sit there and still mess with their email, their texting, whatever the form of communication there is using, and go, why isn't this working? Why isn't this used? For a full day, get frustrated, call their provider, and the provider will say, hey, I need you just to turn that off and then turn it back on. And then all of a sudden it's working again. People do that with their Wi-Fi. I don't have internet. The sky's falling. And they'll play with their device that the Wi-Fi is connected, but forget that, maybe I just need to go reset my router. And in 5 minutes, I'm back up and running, right? So just doing things yourself, it gives you like those little skills. It gives you those mental checklists. It forces you through a process of elimination to solve your own problems. And we should continue to build on those, because that's what creates innovation in this country, Like if we come to a screeching halt and you're not going to be innovative in your own life or be able to teach your kids a damn thing about how to deal with the future, So, start by just doing things yourself, create your process of elimination, figure out how things work, figure out how to troubleshoot them, because most of the time it's not broken. It's just you're broken. So we just need to fix ourselves, simply put.
And I feel like if you're not careful in modern life, because of all the conveniences and technology, you can become weak relying on all that. Neglecting our basic connection with nature and getting our hands dirty and picking up different skills. There's always, somebody we can call to do the job, or one click on Amazon and then the thing arrives, a brand new one the next day. Like, if you're not careful, you can become weak over time living this way.
Yeah, no, that's right. We've definitely hammered that one in. And like you pointed out, if I can have Amazon deliver something that then promotes that self-reliance, then by all means, you should be doing it. If I can use my phone to call 911 because I'm in the middle of nowhere, then you should. Being self-reliant doesn't mean be stupid, right? Be smart with what you have. Those things that we usually say make us lazy. No, turn it around. Use that technology to be more self-reliant. And I've worn that word out, but I'm telling you, I think this it is picking up traction. Self-reliance is becoming a thing, and it's not being a prepper. Okay, a prepper buys crap and then shoves it in a closet or puts it in backpacks and waits for the zombies to come. Okay, this is not prepping. This is learning how to do things yourself and then implementing it into your lifestyle, which will only help you. There is no downside to any of this. And once again, it will prevent complacency and laziness, because you're taking technology, leveraging it to be self-sufficient, and then at the same time, increasing your independence and freedom, and because you're doing it yourself. And you've only got you to rely on. And if there was one thing as a SEAL I kind of embraced and became addicted to, is anytime all the success and all the failure resided solely on me. Like, I enjoy that. I like it when, it's almost like being an entrepreneur, or, anytime you do anything alone, all the success, all the failure, it's all on me. And what happens is, for me at least, when you embrace it, all of a sudden your performance goes through the roof, because failure is not an option. This is zero fail mission. So success is the only thing that I'm going to have. And yes, I may stumble, I may fall, but I'm not going to call it a failure. I'm just stumbling and falling and learning my way through it, to the point when you have no option but to be successful at this stuff. And that's anything in life.
Clint, I'm really curious on your transition from being a SEAL to coming back into, civilian life. Because being a SEAL, I can imagine things are going 100 miles an hour all day, every day. There's always something to do. Talk about retiring and how you went about handling that in a healthy way.
Yeah, the transition is it's daily, it's monthly, it's annual thing. For me, it doesn't go away. When you do 20 plus years of all of these high end adrenaline based operations and missions, and then the day you retire, it just comes to a screeching halt, right? I mean, there's no like weaning you into civilian life. There's no way of weaning you off, these zero fail missions. And so, yeah, it's a daily thing. I have my moments where I have to just literally talk out loud and say, okay, go knock off at least 3 or 4 things off your list. Just go do it, whether you want to or not. And so the transition, both, in your personal life, going from a paycheck every 2 weeks to, okay, I'm just going to do my own thing and hopefully the money will follow, so those were all risks, but I enjoy risk and I enjoy, taking chances. And that's where I get a little bit of fulfillment that I used to get from those operations. What I've learned to do is transition the risks over to other things that fill the voids, right? So before I was getting the paycheck every 2 weeks, but I was getting the fulfillment of risk from the operations I was doing. When you get out, now it's like, okay, now I don't know where my money's coming from. That's a risk. Okay, so that's a transition point. That's my risk. Okay, so I'm getting that. I'm getting fed and satisfied by having risk in my life again, but it's for money now, right? So and trying to be successful at other things other than government operations. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a daily, weekly, monthly thing to transition. And unfortunately, guys I know, they don't know how to do that part, or they didn't figure out how to switch one thing out for another. And then they end up, in a bad place, and that sucks. So, you try to help those guys as much as you can, and hope for the best. So, yeah, transition's tough and not easy for everyone.
Yeah. And we're all going to go through transition, through retirement. But again, you're in this group of, it's a small elite group of people that has this extreme nature to what they're doing, and then going from one extreme to the next. I was just curious how that worked out.
Yeah, so far so good, but I have my moments.
Well, it seems like you've transitioned into putting the efforts into teaching and writing these books and funneled it in a healthy way. So
yeah, I am trying to just really get people to snap out of the little worlds they're in and take a look at some of this other stuff going on, whether it's crisis or or becoming more self-reliant. It's all the same. I feel like that's my lane in life now, is just how to prevent crisis and how to be more self-reliant. And I think if people just take on 1% of what I'm throwing out there, well, then they'll be better for it, I hope.
For somebody that's tuned in and they're with us to this point, and they're in at least to a point, they want to transition a bit and start taking on some of these new skills and new things in their life, what is some of the low-hanging fruit you'd recommend to people? Say 2 or 3 things that is going to produce a lot of benefit for them.
Wow, there's a bunch. Let me see. I would say number one, you have to decide. You have to make a decision that you want to start, being more self-reliant, right? You have to make the decision. If your decision is no, I don't, well, that's where it ends for you, right? So make the decision. 2, do the research. Do the research. Really look at all the different ways to be self-reliant. These 10 chapters are broken out into 10 of the biggest ways that I think you could start. And then research the ones that you feel like you're most interested in and that you'd probably, do the best at. And then that's going to happen is then that's going to increase your success rate. And then you get that satisfaction piece and decide to move further with it, right? So once the research is done, then it's start acting it out, right? Action, action, action is the third piece. You have to just go for it and take all the research and turn it into actionable tasks and start checking off a list. I'm a list person, I have to write it down, and I like to write it down as many things as I can, and then circle the priorities and then cross off the priorities once they're done, circle the new priorities on the same list, knock those out. Before you know it, the list is done. My list is never done, though, because I keep adding to it every day. But I'm always circling the priorities, crossing off the priorities, adding to it, right? And then before you know it, you're doing all kinds of stuff for yourself. And you're probably not watching TV as much. You're probably not scrolling on your phone as much. And you're learning and experiencing things that you wish you would have learned and experienced a decade ago.
And another thing I see when somebody takes this on, they're going to be moving their body a lot naturally to live this way throughout the day. And they might not need to take, an hour every day to go to the gym or go for a run. Movement is naturally built into living this quote unquote alternative lifestyle, which is awesome.
Right. Yeah. I mean, how many people are wearing these little devices on their wrists and making sure they get 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day, right? And then they sit so much that they actually have to get up and go get their steps in. Like, think about that for a second. Like, that is just insane. Yes, you live this life and you start doing things for yourself, you will be walking. Even if it's in your small little apartment, you will be walking all over the place because, my power drill is over there. The hole I need to make is over here. Okay, I got to go get that. I got to go back over here. All of a sudden you're up and you're moving and you're doing things. And yes, you're going to get your steps in, probably 10,000 plus steps a day easily, which we all know 10,000 steps is 400 calories. So that's good, right? That's right. That adds to your deficit on your diet or whatever eating program you're on. So with 10,000 steps, you're going to get that 400 calorie deficit right out of the gate. And then if you're working out, then you're getting another deficit. And then if you're working with your hands, you're getting more deficit. And now you're eating your own food. That means you're eating healthy and organic. Yeah, you're going to be ripped. You're going to be in the best shape of your life. You may not know what the Kardashians are up to, but you're going to be just fine without that.
Well, one of the broad topics that this book and our conversation is shining a light on is the fact that we become so disconnected from the way things used to be and living in a natural way. And you keep restating this. It's all about taking what you've learned from, again, listening to us or reading your book, applying it in small bits and see where it goes. Because, the way that we've headed and where we're at today just isn't sustainable. And we need to look back at nature, simplify life, and regain back a lot of these skills that we've lost.
Yeah, I say if you're into watching, these popular shows these days, whether it's Yellowstone or now the new one that Sheridan came out with, 1883. I'm not saying get a chuck wagon, and cruise across the country you live in. I'm saying, it's okay to take it step by step, and because we have that luxury. That's a luxury to take things step by step. Less than 200 years ago, it wasn't a luxury. It was like they had to figure it out. They're just going to die where they're walking or where they're standing or where they're sitting, right? We have the luxury right now to embrace a little bit of this stuff. And that's only because things could get bad again, And so taking that opportunity, taking advantage of the luxury of time, and I don't know how much time any one person has as it relates to global events, but the next big issue could sneak up on you. So just take the time right now, which is a luxury, and learn a couple of things, and then learn a couple of more things, and do some trial and error. And then I think, you'll wake up one day going, well, I'm actually doing a whole lot of things myself, me and my family. And we're not really having to rely on, any other things. And that's a good place to be.
Love it, Clint. Really enjoyed the conversation. I know I'm inspired from reading your book and chatting with you to take on learning some new skills and becoming more self-sufficient. So I'm going to link up the book, The Rugged Life. We're going to link up your social media. Really enjoyed this. Thanks again, Clint.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great speaking with you.
Now that you're done watching my conversation with Clint, be sure and check out my chat with Michael here and learn how comfort is killing you.
And when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, like we're just like a speck of dust on this thing. I mean, we're just like a blink. And that freaked me out.